This is the Data Privacy Detective, September 2024 data privacy news. There are two big ones from September you're going to hear about here. One is a dramatic staff report from the Federal Trade Commission. It's called A Look Behind the Screens, and it's about video streaming and social media companies. And the other one's about a new law. It's really an amendment to an existing law out of California having to do with our brains and the brainwave data that is collected and used by devices and companies that own them. Now, staff reports are seldom news. At least they're not covered as news. But the FTC, Federal Trade Commission staff report of September 19, 2024 is important, it's essential, and pioneering groundwork in the data privacy field. It will, I predict, foretell legislation and regulation that's going to follow soon, or will at least provide guidance for the next Congress that may actually reach across the partisan divide towards more nationwide United States data privacy rules. Well, let's get into it. What is this staff report and what does it all mean? Well, in late 2020, the Federal Trade Commission issued orders to 9 companies, including Amazon, then Facebook, now Meta, YouTube, TikTok's owner, and other giant companies. These are among the largest social media and video streaming companies in the world. And the FTC asked for information about how these giants collect, process, track, and otherwise use our personal information that they gather. And the information was then probed by the staff and considered, and it revealed how these companies decide what advertising we see, what other content is showed to individuals on their platforms, and how our personal data is shared and sold to third parties, whether we know about it or not. It also probed the use of algorithms that these companies use and how data analytics are developed about us from personal and demographic data. And this is focused especially, this staff report focused in great detail about how all of this affects minors, children, teenagers, anyone under 18 years of age. Now, these results, these findings, and the data behind them are all reported in the September 2024 staff report, easily found on your favorite search engine. Video streaming and social media companies collect, we knew this, but now it's documented ever more so. They collect a huge amount of personal data. Let's consider for a minute how our data is collected and where it comes from. Well, if a company wants to, it can get direct input from us. We sign up on a site and share information with us. Then there's passively gathered information. We're using our cell phone or our PC, and we passively are passing on information very often without knowing it. The company gathering this data can engage with social media and video streaming services to obtain it. Then there's how we use other products or services provided by affiliates of companies that we've allowed to gather our data or use it. Then the social media and video streaming companies, they connect with other platforms or online services. It's a whole information data flow network that exists out there. Other information about us is inferred. It's from algorithms, data analytics, artificial intelligence, that's increasingly on the front page of the news. Then there's advertising tracking technology, which is guessing what ads we'd really like to see, which then generates, of course, advertising revenue for these companies, aside from what they're telling us they're doing. And then there's data from advertisers and data brokers, vast amounts of information about us that most of us have no idea are held by thousands of companies. And this is not accidental collection and use of data, because these companies, these giant tech companies, make billions of dollars off the data beyond what they're doing to sell us a book online or involve us with a social media group of our friends and so on. Now, the Federal Trade Commission chair, Lena Khan, reported in regard to the staff report that the surveillance practices of these 9 companies and others like it, quote, endanger people's privacy, threaten their freedoms, and expose them to a host of harms from identity theft to stalking, close quote. She found that teens and other younger children are especially exposed to various harms caused by this. And she urged legislators to consider how better to protect people from abusive data practices based on the staff's findings. The staff report cites research studies about how social media and streaming companies contribute to adverse mental health impact on youngsters. And the report finds that some companies treat teens the same as adults in an attempt to avoid liability under the Federal Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and its regulations. And that's because teenagers between the ages of 13 and 18 are in a gray area. They're not adults yet, and yet they're not considered infants or children under 13. Well, beyond the amount of the data that's held about us and how that can cause serious harm to people, the report documented what it described as wholly inadequate company practices. There are deficiencies in data collection, minimization, and retention practices. These were found generally applicable and in place. And some companies would not actually delete user data after they receive requests to have the data deleted. Well, these are all findings in the staff report. Well, the report describes how this isn't by accident that this data is collected and subject to relatively lax protection. Instead, companies employ data from users and non-users in their automated systems as part of the push to algorithms and use of AI with data that individuals really have no notice about at all. And we all have little or no means of opting out of having data used for AI and other purposes. Well, interesting. So what, you might ask? Well, this is not a report that's just going to gather dust. The protection of personal privacy is a nonpartisan matter. All 5 of the FTC commissioners voted unanimously to release the staff report. And there are blue, red, and purple so-called politically designated states jumping into action here, especially about protecting minors from data abuse and its consequences. Congressional efforts seem close to one's predicting that the next Congress could be the one that will enact an overarching federal data privacy law. And even if that doesn't happen, Congress will surely revise the Children's Online statute to address the concerns highlighted in the staff report. For example, companies should not be able to hide behind the pretense that they don't know if minors are using their platforms. There are ways to capture that information accurately. One can expect Congress to stop companies from treating teenagers as the same as adults, given what the report found. And I would expect Congress and states to insist on individual rights of consumers to have data deleted or corrected on request. It might even be that Congress and states will make data minimization an enforceable requirement, and requiring that it be easy for consumers to opt out, at least, of the collection and use of their personal information without the approval of those of us whose data it is. Well, it's worth reading the staff report. Take a look. Others will be doing that. Now let's turn to what California did to add neural, N-E-U-R-A-L, data to its code on data privacy protection. Now, Colorado was the first state to bring neural data into its code, but California is the second. And California is where most of the neurological industry is located. Governor Newsom signed the act on September 28, 2024. Well, Senate Bill 1223 is enacted, amends the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. And it includes a definition now of neural data. I'll quote, neural data means information that is generated by measuring the activity of a consumer's central or peripheral nervous system, and that is not inferred from non-neural information. Well, you can see how that definition embraces devices, increasingly common in the neural space, that we may wish to purchase and use. The Act puts neural data on the same level as sensitive personal information, as biometrics and DNA and precise geolocation information about us. So it's not just personal information, it's sensitive personal information, regulated more strictly than something like your email address. The Act responds to what's really happening in the neurotechnology space. Brain and nerve tracking consumer devices are proliferating, many over the counter, not medical devices, governed by the FDA. And the idea of the Act, this neural data is now defined, the Act is there to prevent potential misuse of the data, not necessarily it's being collected by a company that's something the consumer wants to have. Because neural data, if mishandled, can reveal identity, health conditions, mental states, a lot of information that is obviously sensitive personal information. And think of some examples. Brainwave data that's collected by a sleep tracking headband. That's neural data. Meditation devices that are offered that pick up that based on connecting to our brains. MRI brain scans. Meta has a wrist sensor that measures nerve signals and turns them into digital commands. That would be covered. Elon Musk has a company that hopes to turn brain signals into action commands. Maybe one day can help the blind see again, can help the paralyzed to move, and so on. So the benefits of these devices are not disadvantaged by the Act. Instead, the Colorado and California Acts lay the foundation on a state basis for protecting against the adverse consequences as this industry sector develops. Because after all, EEG data could be exploited to infer mental health issues, can open the door to privacy invasion and discrimination. Now, FDA-approved medical neurotech devices are exempt from the Act. They're governed by FDA regulation federally. And so the Act applies to unregulated by the FDA consumer neurotech devices, which of course suggests the FDA may wish to consider similar protections for FDA-approved devices, either through direct regulation or by requesting federal legislation that'll make clear the authority to do that. Well, what are the rights of us under the California Act, assuming it applies to us? I don't live in California. Maybe you don't either. Well, if the act does apply, then you have all the rights that the California Consumer Protection Act provides to you now, the CCPA. The right to know what's being collected, in this case, in the past year about you. The right to get a copy of neural information that's collected about you. Take a look at it. The right to delete neural data held by a third party. There are some exceptions to that, but they're minor. The right to opt out so that a business holding your neural data cannot share or sell it without your express consent. And the right to non-discrimination. It requires equal service and pricing and no retaliation if you opt out. They can't take the device away from you, for example. So for individuals, what do we do? Well, you may not want to do all this, but if you have a neural device, think about it. Learn what data a neurotech device company is capturing about you. Start with that. Read the privacy policy. Well, who wants to do that? And I don't say you rush out and hire a lawyer to do it, but be aware of your basic choices under the privacy policy. Use privacy controls. Set it to data privacy-centric settings if you're able to do that through the device's website. Monitor your data. You'll have the right under California law to ask for periodic reports about how your data is being collected and used. And finally, before you buy a device, consider the trade-offs of privacy that you may want to have about your brainwaves and what you're about to purchase as a device. Which leads me to my conclusion, my usual ending of every podcast. Dear listeners, protecting your personal data begins with you.